and technique. As I repeated in other sessions, this is a very general introduction for people to get an idea of what the Kaccāyana is. We are not really going into the details. We are not really going to study the Kaccāyana grammar itself, but I hope that what I'm going to explain will help people who are later on going to study the grammar. So in the lesson for today, we will first recap a little bit what we saw last day. Well, someone mentioned in the question and answer section an example of Upaguttena Baddo Maro. That's a very interesting example, because this example is not found in the canonical literature of the Theravada. So before we go into the Kaccāyana Buddhi, we're going to look a little bit into this example. Then the core of today's session will be about the Kaccāyana Buddhi, of which we have mentioned before, but we have not gone into the details of it. Actually, we have been discussing how the sutta works, how the sutras work, and that is quite difficult. It becomes easier when we start looking at the Kaccāyana Buddhi, but I didn't want to go into the details of the Buddhi before, because if we understand how the sutras, how the aphorisms work, then the Buddhi is much more clear, and then we know how to use the Buddhi. So in the main section of today's session, we will look a little bit into the contested authorships of the Kaccāyana Buddhi, which is important also when it comes to understanding its structure. Then we will look into the fields and functions of the Buddhi. That I would say is the main point for today. If you can understand this point in a very basic way, that's enough for today. And finally, of course, some examples to illustrate it. So without further ado, we'll begin with a recap of last section. Actually, we are not going to summarize everything, but I thought it would be good to discuss a little bit the example of mentioning Upagupta in the Kaccāyana grammar. So as many of you probably already know, Upagupta is a Buddhist saint, who is worshipped in Southeast Asia. You will find many statues like this. This one is found in the Upagupta shrine, the Upagupta shrine at Wat Pawon Niwet in Thailand. You will find many statues like this also in Myanmar and other countries. So you can see this is very characteristic because this monk is looking at the sky, most probably looking at the clouds. This monk is related to water, to the sea, to the rains, etc., and always with one hand inside the bowl. So this is Upagupta. What is interesting about this Upagupta is that this is not a person that we find in the Pali scriptures, as we said before, but he is well known as one of the 5 patriarchs of the Sarvastivadin school. The others are Mahakashyapa, Ananda, Madhyantika, and Shanakavasin. These are famous patriarchs of the Sarvastivadin school, with the traditional headquarters in northern India, in the city of Mathura. And as we have been mentioning, this tradition in some way or another extended to Southeast Asia, and it's still part of the Southeast Asian Buddhist cults or tradition. But although it is not part of the canonical literature of the Theravada Buddhists, because the canonical literature of the Theravada Buddhists probably originated in Ujjain, or in the Pali sources, it's named Ujjaini. That would be the capital of the kingdom of Avanti in western India, today roughly corresponding to Maharashtra, part of Gujarat maybe, or Rajasthan, but western India. And that's where originally, as we know from the tradition, the Pali text that we know went from Ujjain to Sri Lanka, carried by Mahinda, the son of the Emperor Ashoka. And interestingly, the tradition of Kaccāyana or Kaccāyana, which is the author or the name of the grammar that we are studying in this series, is also associated to Ujjain. So here somehow we have 2 different traditions. To simplify, the red one from Mathura to Southeast Asia, that would be the Sarvastivadin tradition. We know for a fact that the Sarvastivadin tradition had a presence in Southeast Asia, but we don't know the details of it. We don't know exactly how it disappeared also. And then if you wish, we can call the Theravadin tradition or Staviravadin tradition, from Ujjain to Lanka, and from Lanka then expanding to Southeast Asia, also to southern India, and from southern India to Southeast Asia. So definitely Upagupta is not part of the cosmos, or literary cosmos of the Pali tradition. But as we said, he's still worshipped in Southeast Asia. There is an article by Charles Durwazel that many of you might know because he wrote a very good Pali grammar. He was working in Burma in the 19th and early 20th century. And in one article about Upagupta and Mara, he says that the Burmese believe that Upagupta is always at the bottom of the ocean, not far from Molemian. Molemian, you can see the city here on your right. Not far from Molemian, inside the palace made of gold. Thus the Burmese, with this festival, with the festival that he has just described, they celebrate his victory over Mara. So the victory of Upagupta over Mara. But this is the episode that the example in the Kaccāyana is about. But this episode is not found in the Pali literature that we know, but it is found in some Pali literature. It's found in a text called the Lokapanyati, attributed to a certain Saddamagosa. The date, I think, is not quite clear. Usually it is believed that is prior. It was written before the 15th century of the Common Era. And this is a text on cosmology, as the title indicates, but the cosmology, of course, in the Theravada sense of the word, it's not a treatise on astrophysics or anything like that, of course. It's cosmology in a very broad sense that includes the battles between the good and the evil. And in that context, then you will find an episode where Upagupta has to bind Mara. So in this Lokapanyati, there's an episode where Upagupta battles Mara, and the purpose is to protect the stupa building program of Ashoka. So Upagupta is a contemporary of Ashoka, and the story goes that when Ashoka is about to start building the thousands of stupas in his kingdom, he has this project, he's preparing the project, and the Sangha is afraid that Mara will intervene and ruin the project. So the Sangha try to find some suitable person to fight Mara and thus save Ashoka's project. Then after some search, they come to know that there is a very powerful monk who is meditating at the bottom of the sea, at the bottom of the ocean. And his name in this story is Kisanaga, so it's a kind of monk and also Naga, at least the name, that's what the name reveals. The Kisanaga, that means a very thin, emaciated Naga, and that's Upagupta, none other than Upagupta. He is meditating at the bottom of the sea. Because of that, he has been missing all the ceremonies of the Sangha, so that's very bad. And with this excuse, the Sangha leaders, they tell him that he has to undergo some sort of punishment, danda, and they say, because you have been missing the meetings, now you will have to prevent Mara from ruining Ashoka's project. And he accepts this punishment with very happily as an honor. And then there is a kind of showdown between Upagupta and Mara, in which each of them they transform themselves into powerful beings or monsters, to the point where Mara becomes a snake or a dragon, and Upagupta becomes a Garuda bird that can kill a dragon. So in this way, Upagupta wins the showdown, is the winner. And then Mara, feeling defeated, instead of transforming himself into another monster, maybe just to appease Upagupta, he adopts the form of a very gentleman, a very good person. He adopts this shape. But then Upagupta wants to keep him in check, and Upagupta then hangs a rotten dead dog on the neck of Mara. So that's very interesting. That's where things become interesting. And then because Mara has a dead dog hanging on his neck, people will not approach him. That is, people will not feel the temptation, I understand. Then Mara is really upset about that. And Mara goes to the gods in different heavens asking for help, and to the Shaka and Brahmas, etc. But they say, we cannot help you. Upagupta is a really powerful meditator. So you have to go back to Upagupta and ask for forgiveness. That's what Mara will do. And Upagupta will forgive him on the condition that Mara will come with him near to a mountain. And then Upagupta will remove the dead dog from Mara's neck but we'll use the leash of the dog to tie Mara in the mountain, so that Mara will not be able to move for the 7 years, 7 months, 7 days, etc., that the preparations of Ashoka and stupa building project will last. So during this time, Ashoka will be able to build all the stupas, and Mara will be tied, bound to a mountain with a dog leash. And that's the origin of the example that we find in the Kaccāyana grammar. Quite interesting, I would say. I didn't know it. I just read it in Durarzel's article. Probably the reference book for the Loka-Paññatti, the only one that I could find is this one. It's a PhD thesis from Paris, the Loka-Paññatti and the cosmologic ideas in ancient Buddhism. So that's basically the thesis. I think there is the book was published later. I would say that in some library I have read it, or at least gone through it, but I couldn't find it in the internet or even the cover. This is how it looks like inside. This is just a PhD thesis from the 70s. The most famous is this study by John Strong. I think many of you already know it. So if you want to know more about the legend of Upagupta and how this legend of Sanskrit Buddhism went from North India to Southeast Asia and how it developed and transformed, I would recommend this very important book. So going back to the Loka-Paññatti, which is the only Pali text where we find this example, what I could find is this sentence: Maro upaguttena vinito damito buddhatta patinyam gahesati iti. So the iti at the end is important. This is a quotation, and it's quoting a prophecy of the Buddha. So this is the Buddha speaking here, and the Sangha, I don't know if it's Upagupta himself, I think it's some members of the Sangha, they remember that the Buddha already prophesied that Upagupta would defeat and tame Mara. In other sources of the Sarvastivada, actually it's a proper defeat, but in this Pali tradition, it's not exactly destroying Mara, but converting Mara into Buddhism, so that Mara will make a resolution to become a Buddha. So the sentence means Mara, subdued and tamed by Upagupta, will make the resolution to become a Buddha. That is the Buddha speaking, according to this text. And so now we go back to our Kaccāyana. So this is the rule 283 in Olepin's edition. As you can see, it's about the karakas, the case syntax. Yokaroti sakatta, this is about the agent, katta. And just to make clear that katta doesn't need to be in the nominative, here in this sentence, like buddhena jito maro and upaguttena baddo maro, upaguttena is the katta, it's in the instrumental. As it has been observed, and last day in the last class someone made this question, what is this example doing here? Where does it come from? So we don't really know. It could have been introduced in Southeast Asia, in Myanmar. The only other Pali grammar where we find the same example is the Saddhaniti. That's page number and line. So page 691, line 14 in Helmer Smith's edition. Same example, upaguttena baddo maro. It was translated in Ivan Kar's study of the Saddhaniti Karaka section. Translation: Mara was bound by Upagupta. We will never find the story of how he was bound by Upagupta in the Pali Tipitaka or in the Atthakatha or Tikas. Indeed, some Burmese sources, they complain that this Loka-Paññatti, including this story, is not found anywhere in our Pali literature. But we find it in the Loka-Paññatti. And if we know the story, the background story, then we understand why it says baddo, because literally Mara was tied to the mountain with the dog leash. So apart from the Saddhaniti, we cannot find this example anywhere else. It's missing in the major commentaries like the Mukkamattadipani, or otherwise known as Nyasa. That's the earliest long commentary on the Kaccāyana, very important commentary written in the 10th century or so. And it's also missing in the Rupa Siddhi, which is a little bit more alarming, because if it's not in the Rupa Siddhi, I would say it's probably then it's a later interpolation. So is it an interpolation? That's the question. So we cannot tell anything for certain, but I would say it's an interpolation. Now, are interpolations an anomaly in the Kaccāyana Buddhi? Not at all. So that's what we are going to see now in the next section on the Kaccāyana Buddhi proper. So when we study the Kaccāyana, we study the Kaccāyana Buddhi as well. These two texts, they always come together. Now, the title Buddhi in Sanskrit would be Vritti, and Vritti can mean many things. It means rolling on, going on, developing. In the Monier-Williams Sanskrit-English Dictionary, you will see that one of the definitions of vritti is, which applies here, is a commentary, comment, gloss, explanation, especially on a sutra. So in the grammatical tradition, there are a little bit more technical definitions of vritti, but basically that's what it is. Maybe the etymology of this term vritti could also be related to the fact that it's an ongoing or running gloss or commentary. If you would simply take the glosses in the Kaccāyana Buddhi and attach one after the other, you would already have the content of the sutras plus intercalated glosses. So it would look like a running gloss or running comment on the sutra. So you wouldn't really need the sutra text with you because that is already included and repeated in the vritti. The Kaccāyana Buddhi is not alone in the tradition of Buddhists or Brutis, of course. In the Katantra tradition, you have the Katantra Sutra accompanied with the Katantra Vritti. In the Chandra, the same. The most famous Vritti, perhaps in the grammatical tradition of India, and I guess in the world for that matter, is the Kashika Vritti, the Vritti of Banaras or Varanasi. The Kashika Vritti, very famous Vritti on the Paninian Sutras, which is, I would say, the only Vritti that is known by itself as a grammatical work. The other Vrittis always accompany the sutras. The Kashika Vritti is the most famous one. The Kashika Vritti, according to Ole Pin, has also influenced the Kaccāyana Buddhi, not only the Katantra Vritti, but also the Kashika Vritti. And then in the Pali tradition, in the Moggallana grammar, we find the Moggallana Sutta, the Moggallana Buddhi, and so on. So usually there are three main layers or two layers of commentary after the sutra. So the sutra or sutta is the aphorism, the rule. The vritti is a gloss. It is very short. And after the vritti would come the tika, that in this tradition, it's not like the tikas it's not a sub-commentary, although you could call it a sub-commentary. It's a long commentary. Sometimes instead of tika, it's called a panchika, like an expansion of the meaning, the nyasa, meaning the support or the assistance to the reading of the vritti, etc. This third layer of commentary incorporates the second one. So the tika would comment on vritti and sutta also. So if we look at the Kaccāyana, it comes always with the vritti, like in this case. You don't need to understand the meaning of the sutra and vritti here. Some of you will, others not. That's not very important right now. I just would like to show how there are some examples that are not to be found in the Pali literature, like the example of Upagutta. There are other examples that you will not find in the Pali literature. And you will probably not find them in the Sarvastivadin literature or anything like that. They are probably simply stock examples in the grammatical tradition. In this case, it seems very clear that these examples come from the Katantra Vritti. So in the same way that the Kaccāyana Sutta copies or adapts the Katantra Sutra, the Kaccāyana Buddhi copies or adapts or modifies or takes materials from the Katantra Vritti. So in this case, it's very clear. But that doesn't mean that the Kaccāyana Buddhi is a copy of the Katantra Vritti. There are many things that are different, and sometimes the difference are quite important, like even in terms of interpretation, not simply in terms of wording. Here you can see that in the Kaccāyana Buddhi interpretation of the rule, which is basically the same, it's about how to use the seventh case ending, i.e. the locative case ending, to express time, kala, or to express an impersonal expression that we know better as a locative absolute. So in these cases, the Kaccāyana Buddhi says that the seventh case is used when the active is used, whereas in the Katantra, you see that there is a different expression, a slightly different interpretation. It says that the Saptami Vibhakti, the seventh case, will be used when they are qualifiers. That means when the expression of time, kala, or the expression of the impersonal, they are qualifiers, visheshana. So qualifiers of what? Qualifiers of the verb. So kriya visheshana means adverb. So when they are used in an adverbial sense, then you use the Saptami Vibhakti. That's basically a rule that provides for the construction of what we know as the locative absolute. Nothing more like that. I just wanted to illustrate how there are differences. So even though it is clear that the Kaccāyana Buddhi takes materials from the Katantra Vritti, it's simply a copycat. Another example, this again is a rule from the Karaka section. Yena va kairate tam karanam, yena kriyate tat karanam. There is only one va extra. And you can see that many of the materials, I mean, great part of the Vritti is similar, and then there are some differences as it is to be expected. So like with the Sutta, similarly it happens with the Vritti, the Katantra and the Kaccāyana are quite similar. Now we are going to discuss a little bit about authorships. I say authorships already. Authorships means that maybe there is not one single author for the Kaccāyana Vritti, but the tradition says that there is only one author. So what's going on here? That's what we are going to see now. We start from what we generally accept, or what everyone accepts, what is more or less the state of affairs when we discuss the Kaccāyana Vritti. The author, usually when it is asked who is the author, traditionally of the Kaccāyana Vritti, is someone called Sanganandin. We don't know anything about this Sanganandin. The name appears in some places, as we will see, but that's all. Then, of course, there is a debate even in the ancient tradition, in the medieval tradition, as to whether there is one author or more. That meaning that maybe Sanganandin only composed one part of what we call the Vritti, and there are other parts of the Vritti composed by other authors, as we will see. So there is a debate on that. Then others will say that no, the entire thing, that the Sutta and the Vritti, it's all composed by the same author. There are different opinions. The date, roughly 8th century Common Era, and that is for the simple reason that it has to be later than the Kashika Vritti. Then another thing that both modern scholars and traditional scholars agree is that the Vritti, this gloss on this short commentary on the Kaccāyana, contains many problematic interpretations. That meaning that in some places it seems that the author of this Vritti, or authors of the Vritti, are not understanding the exact intention of the Sutta, of the rule. And related to that, there is one section, usually or many times in the Vritti, that will expand the scope of the Sutta in a way that it also looks like an interpolation. It looks like someone has been trying to add more information. They didn't know how to do it, so they take one of the technical terms used in the Sutta, some marker like cha, va, pi, and from them they develop what looks almost entirely like a new Sutta within the Sutta. So I would like to quote Ole Pint here. He is the authority. His study on the grammatical tradition in Pali is already in the Google Drive folder. You can read it in full. Here I'll just read this important paragraph about the Vritti. He says, quote, "The question of the authorship of Kaccāyana Vritti is not crucial." So that's important. It's not crucial in the light of the fact that the Mukkamattadipani, that means the Nyasa, the longer commentary, comments upon a version of the Kaccāyana Vritti, which in many respects is markedly different from its present-day Sinhalese and Burmese versions. To complicate matters even more, they are mutually different. Thus, the Burmese version differs from the Sinhalese, not only with respect to the purely exegetical parts of the commentary, but also as regards the number, order, and occasional analysis, Viggaha in Sanskrit Vigraha, of the examples illustrating each rule. Here again, we have problems with examples. And Pint concludes, even Sinhalese manuscripts differ among themselves. So the picture would be something like that. We suppose that there was once upon a time an original Kaccāyana Vritti, and some text developing from this original Kaccāyana Vritti is the one that is commented by Vimala Buddhi in the Mukkamattadipani. But a different text is the one that we know as the Kaccāyana Vritti. But we don't preserve the second layer or the second stage of development of this Kaccāyana Vritti, because we have already divergent traditions of the Kaccāyana Vritti. If we read the Burmese Kaccāyana Vritti, BE, Burmese edition, we will find one text. If we read the CE, that means Ceylon, Sri Lanka edition, we'll find different readings. And as Ole Pint says, if we would go to the manuscripts, the situation would become basically chaos. So that again is a reason not to use too many manuscripts when one is editing the Kaccāyana, but rather to try to look at the commentarial tradition and try to understand what is really going on. But generally speaking, so the convention is that the Kaccāyana Sutta is composed by Mahakaccāyana Thera. That's what tradition says. He is normally called the Suttakara, the maker of the Sutta, and the Kaccāyana Vritti is ascribed to a certain Sanganandin, who is many times not mentioned by name, but simply as the Vrittikara. so the maker of the Vutti. This tradition is as old as the Padasadhana Tika, cited in Olipin's article. The citation says that Kaccāyana Sanganandi Vimala Buddhi Mahateradihi Katesu Sutta Vutti Nyasa Adisu. So it means in the Sutta, Vutti, Nyasa, etc., composed by Kaccāyana Sanganandi Vimala Buddhi, etc. So there is the correlation in order. The Sutta composed by Kaccāyana, Vutti composed by Sanganandi, Nyasa composed by Vimala Buddhi. Another important quotation that appears in many sources, the oldest one I think is the Saddhamma Sangaha by Dhammakitti, composed in around the 5th century in Thailand, if I'm not wrong. Please correct me if I'm wrong. It says something like this: Kaccāyana Kato Yogo, Butticha Sanganandina, Payogo Brahmadattena, Nyaso Vimala Buddhina. There are different interpretations of this stanza, but basically the basic one, the most straightforward, is the one you see below in my provisional translation. Kaccāyana composed the yoga, that means the sutta, and Sanganandin composed the Vutti. Brahmadatta composed the Payoga, and Vimala Buddhi composed the Nyasa. So what happens here is that now we have another layer of text that we haven't seen before. And it's not announced in any book cover of the Kaccāyana, which is the Payoga. So is it another book, another commentary, or is it part of what we know as the Vutti? That's the question. Usually, the understanding of the term Payoga here means simply udaharana, that means examples. So, according to this tradition, reflected in this stanza, there are at least 2 layers of text in what we call the Vutti. There is the Vutti proper, and then there is the Payoga, that is the examples. Among the examples, there will be, again, our Upaguttena Baddho Maro. So if there is a problem with this Upaguttena Baddho Maro, that would belong to a section that is not the Vutti proper, but the Payoga. And this section was composed, according to this tradition, by someone called Brahmadatta. Now, having seen this, I think we can move to the most important part for today. I hope I will be brief, because it would be good to have time for discussion. So the fields and functions of the Kaccāyana Vutti. This, I think it will be very simple and straightforward. Most of you probably already know that, so I'm sorry if I'm going to repeat something very obvious, but it needs to be stressed upon. I think it's an important point when we start studying the Kaccāyana to be able to distinguish each layer of text and with its function, especially when we will later on, not in this course, but maybe in some other course, we are going to read commentaries. So this is what we find in the printed edition. And as we have said many times, we call the sutta the rule on the top. We call the Vutti the rest. The rest, that is a text that contains a lot of information, although it is very brief. Now, the thing goes as follows. You have the sutta on the top, but then you can have different layers or different sections in the Vutti. You don't need to have them all the time. In fact, I have not found any example where what we call the Vutti contains the 5 fields, but many times you will find 4 of them. The first one is the Vutti proper. That means the gloss. So it is simply explaining in full the meaning of the sutta. The sutta is very brief, so the Vutti proper is expanding this short sentence into a full sentence that is comprehensible. The next field is the udaharana. Udaharana, as many of you know, means example. That what you bring in as an example. Then there is a section that I call counterexamples, although this is not a direct translation of the Pali term kimudaharana. The kimudaharanas are simply examples of what would happen if we would miss some of the words in the sutta. So if the sutta would not contain one of the words, what would happen? And what would happen is that we would have an undesired result. Something that we would not want, a result that we do not expect. So that's why it's called the kimudaharana. It's a kind of counterexample. The purpose of these examples are usually to check the sutta text and to prove that every single syllable in the sutta is necessary. It's not redundant. So udaharana and kimudaharana, I would say they all count as examples, but in the tradition they are separated into 2 different sections. So we need to learn how to distinguish them. Then there is a section that I call Payojana, because it's usually introduced with the question Kim Payojana, so what is the application? That is the application of the rule. The meaning of this means that it's usually applied to definitions. So when you define a technical term, then there will be a section in the Vutti telling you in which operation rule you will have to use the technical term. So it's helping you to know where a technical term is going to be used. It will be applied. Finally, a very interesting and controversial section that has no name proper in the tradition I call Gahana Pala. Gahana meaning the taking or mentioning a word in the sutta, and Pala, as you know, means the fruit or the result. So this section expands on or gives the fruits, so to say, of some of the technical words used in the sutra in such a way that, as I said before, then you create a kind of new sutta within the sutta. So the commentators will say that there are results of a specific word in the sutta that they are generated by this word itself. The word being usually cha, wa, pi, etc. So one of these indeclinables that has no meaning in itself. The commentator will use that to add more information that they consider it was missing. So if we look at an example, it would look something like that. Rule 60, go. You can see the Vutti first, expanding and explaining go as a full sentence. Akaro yada itikyo. So when the letter or the sound a is expresses a feminine iti, tada, then ga sanyo hoti. It has the sanya, it has a technical term, ga. So ga doesn't mean anything, but this is a definition of what ga is going to mean from now on. So when we say ga, that means feminine a ending. That's it. Then you find the examples in yellow, and you find the counter examples in green. You see a itiki mattam, like what is the purpose of saying a in the sutta? And then more importantly, itikyo itiki mattam. So what is the purpose of saying itikyo? Here, there will be a question. Someone will say, well, itikyo is not found in the sutta. The sutta only says go. So why is the Vutti commenting on a word that appears in the Vutti, in the orange part? That is the Vutti itself. So is the Vutti commenting on itself, or what happens here? Well, the fact is that what the Vutti at the top, the orange section, is doing is telling us what are the words that we have to read in the sutta. Although they are invisible, as we will see next day, you have to read them. They are implicit in the sutta. In the green section at the top, or turquoise, all these words are implicit. So the word ittikya is implicit in the sutta. That's why the kimudaharan section, the counterexample, can ask this question. So what is the use of saying ittikyo? That, and then giving other examples. In this case, the example would be that we have to say in the feminine, because there are some masculine words ending in long a, but they are not to be included in this technical term ga. So ga only expresses a ending in the feminine. Finally, the section in red is the payojana. So it's telling you what's the object, what's the aim, or where is the aim, if you understand qua as where is the aim of the sutta, and then it will give you another sutta, in this case gato nadinam, which is a sutta where the term ga is used. That is Kaccāyana 111. And you see that we don't have the phala section, we don't have the fruits of any other word. So we just have 4 sections. Going back to the example before, when we have the text in the printed edition, we should be able to see the different sections like this. Sometimes here in this case, you see below the kind of purple or pink section that is an example of the phala, or giving the result on an extension of one word that is in the sutta. So it says bahuvachana gahanena. So by mentioning the word bahuvachana in the sutta, then we have other results, and then you will have also examples within this next stage of the meaning. In order to identify these sections, there are some tags that you can look for. For the gloss, that is quite evident. What is the gloss? It just simply repeats the words of the sutta. The examples are also quite evident, and sometimes, not always, they are introduced with an expression like tam yata, is like this, or for example, like this. Then the counter examples, the kimudaharanas, are introduced with the kasma or kimattam. The application part is introduced with the question quatto or kim payojanam, and the section on the result of mentioned words is introduced with the the word that we are discussing, a certain word X, plus Gahanena or Saddha Gahanena. So by the mention of X or by the mention of the word X, then there are more results. There are more things that happen in this rule. To finish, very briefly, some examples, simply to see how basically how it should look like when you start separating areas. So the very normal, usual case is that you will find simply two sections, the Vutti and the Udaharana. That is more than enough to understand the meaning of the sutta. That's a gloss plus some examples. That's enough. You will find it this case many times. In some other cases, you will find more. In this case, for instance, you find Vutti, Udaharana, and then directly afterwards, a section discussing what is the meaning of the word cha. So cha simply means and. Actually, it should not mean so many things as the Vutti is saying, but you see that is introducing new examples and expanding the meaning of the sutta by commenting on the word cha. So these are the palas, the fruits. These examples are the fruits of the word cha. This here. Another example where we see four different layers, the Vutti, the Udaharana, and then Kim Udaharana. You can see the Kimattam, Ittikya, Ittikimattam, that identifies the Kim Udaharana section. And then the Payojana section that you can identify with the tag Kuatto. And finally, the last example, again, 4 sections, very similar, and you can easily identify the different layers. So the Vutti, glossing the rule, very simply, the Udaharana's example, counter examples with Kimattam, and finally the Payojana, which is quoting another rule where you will have to use the technical term. So to summarize, the Kaccāyana suttas come with a commentary that we call the Vutti. This commentary is traditionally ascribed to a certain Sanganandin. The Vutti contains several layers. That is very important. So it's not a simple monolithic block. It contains a layer that is glossing the cryptic text of the sutta, and then it gives us examples called Udaharana. Then it connects the sutta with other suttas. Sometimes it helps us to connect some rules with other rules. And very often it also expands the scope of the sutta so that it means more things than what appears to be the essential meaning. So that's all for today. Thank you very much. Now I think we have some time for discussion.
Thank you very much, Aleix. Yes, if people want to ask questions, I have a couple, but I don't want to hog your time, so I'll maybe let other people ask, or people can put in the chat if they like. Ben, so did you want to show a section of your text and see what Aleix makes of it? Ah, okay. And, but maybe you could put it in the chat, just copy and paste into the chat.
Or even share screen, Bante, if you think that will be useful, you could share yours. Okay.
Aha. So where's this from? This this is from a commentary by Ñāṇakitṭi, I think. So it's just oh, you've got the beginning of a translation. Great. So that's the main text, is it? Kira Apanayane is the main text. So Kira in the sense of removing, dispersing. And then we've got yeah, so so this bit, is it from Rahadito Nona is Sutena Nasa no. So this is beginning to quote Kaccāyana. Is that right? Mm-hmm. But how much of it? Is this Kaccāyana 393?
Okay.
So it's without etc. Na un.
Yada nupapanna nipatana siddhanti.
So how would you begin to start deconstructing this? Presumably get hold of the Dvuti as well as the grammar to see how much of that is.
Yeah, let's see what we can do. I'm going to share the screen.
Excellent.
So this is the rule here. The first one that is mentioned. I hope you can see it. Yadanupapanna nipatana siddhanti. And it says yasada aniddita lakkana. So that is, it looks like quite an exceptional rule, or a rule that provides for exceptions, because aniddita lakkana is a bahuvrihi, which means those words, aniddita lakkana, for which the lakkana, the rule to derive for the derivation of those words, aniddita, has not been taught, has not been explained. So I don't remember the exact meaning of the vutti here, but I think it means something like that they are understood as nipatas, so as not having not being declined. So they are exceptions. Then because we don't have rules to derive them, you take them as indeclinables. So they are as they are. Sandhi pakati buddhi lopagama vikarapati satocha vyati vivajantocha te nipatana. So they are considered, they are siddhanti, considered or formed. Nipatana, I understand as nipatas in all these meanings, but this is a little bit complex. I think if we have to start discussing this, so what we would do here is, if possible, to read the nyasa. So I don't know if there is interest. We could try to analyze this sutta with the vutti and the nyasa. This all here. This here, if we follow what we have been seeing today, this is just vutti, this is just gloss. That is only one single section. You don't find examples because this is a kind of paribhasa rule. It's a kind of meta rule. It's telling you what to do when there are no rules. So when you are at a loss, when you don't know how to derive a word, then what are you going to do? So I think in all effects, you treat these words as nipatas. That's what I remember is the meaning, but I might be wrong here.
I'm just gonna, sorry if
yes.
I can interrupt. So one of the things I think is interesting here, can people see?
Oh, shall I share again?
Yeah, yes, please.
Yeah.
So the Venerable Pio Bosso sent the first passage which is a bit of commentary from, I think, 16th century, if that's right, Venerable Pio Bosso from Nyanakiti, working in the Lanna region, and he's actually glossing on the passage I've put up. So kirati paradukkam vikipatiti karana. So he's trying to gloss karana, and I find this really interesting. So he's using a rule to explain the nipata kira to gloss karana, but there isn't actually historically any connection as far as I can tell. So basically trying to disperse the suffering of others, and then he's using this kira in the sense of removal as a basis of karana, as far as I can see, which is really a stretch. So so we've got this strange mixture of the kind of traditional grammar that really explains what the words mean and how to form them, being used in that kind of etymology we get in. So we've got like a double etymology. We've got the real etymology that we find in the grammar of how a word is derived, and then we've got the double etymology that we get in texts which pack meaning into words to give them their religious meaning, for example, drawing on grammar, and yet there isn't really a connection between karana and kira, the declinable kira, if you see what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, actually there is. I was planning to devote one of the sessions to paribhasas, and also some important paribhasas, that is meta rules or interpretive rules, both the ones that are explicit in the Kaccāyana, like this one, and others that are mentioned in the commentaries. And many of these paribhasas, actually the function is a little bit like this, like the one we have just seen, is basically to provide for all these cases in Pali that are impossible or mostly impossible to derive if we just follow the rules. So you cannot get there. Then I think if my interpretation is correct, the only option is that you take them as nipatas. That means words that are indeclinable, they are like frozen, so they are as they are, they don't change. Then if you treat them as nipatas, the nipata is one type of word, you have 4 types of words: nama, akyata, so nouns or nominal words; verbal words, akyata; upasarga, that means preverbs, or also you can include prepositions; and then nipatas, that would mean the particles for indeclinables. The nipatas are as they are frozen. So if you find a word that is impossible to derive, then one possibility is simply to treat it as a nipata, and that's it. But you will also try to find the etymology, but as Professor Kate Crosby was saying now, that is a kind of tour de force, if you want to put it that way. It's quite difficult because the rules will never take you to that final result.
So can I just ask then, so I'm sorry, I'm going to put up a draft translation, which I haven't looked at since I really first did it, and I was really scrabbling. So I haven't revised, but so it seems that once you use this thing as indeclinable, you can, in these etymologies, they're then doing something else with it. So they're then treating it as some kind of root. So that, where is it in the first passage? So kira datumhi ikarasa akaro. So we've got, so you taught us the ikara, so that's the genitive, that's the thing that gets replaced. So
yeah.
Yes, sorry, this is yeah. So going back to the passage that Venerable Pio Basso showed. So we've got rahadito no na ti sutena naso no, and then the next bit. So kira datumhi. So after the in place of the root, no, in the case of the root kira, but isn't the root, it's an interclinable.
Yeah, or you could say the ikara in the root kira becomes akara.
Yeah. So that is what's happening. So we wanted to check that. So basically, even though kira is an indeclinable, it's now being treated as if it's declinable in a sense, or can be changed.
Yes.
Not obviously not the ending, but so that's quite interesting. So
yes, very much.
So okay, so great. Thank you. I think that gives me and Pio Basso something to work with. It just was for us very unfamiliar. And I've done a draft translation which we can work on. Okay, so I'll leave that at that. We've got some questions now. Can you see them in the chat, Aleix, and I will leave you to it.
Yes. So this one, you mentioned by Mary Kate Long, you mentioned that the counterexamples describe what happens when something goes wrong if a syllable is missing. Does this inculcate any sense of risk, of danger of? Not really. I think it's just these are mechanisms of, if you want to put it that way, of checks and balances. So the commentators are always testing the sutta, whether it is formulated in the right way or in the wrong way. And what they do with this is sometimes it's not simply they don't deal with syllables, but with specific words in the sutta. And they say, if you would not mention that word, the meaning would not be complete, and then you would get unwanted results. So with the counterexamples, you show what would happen if you would not mention certain things in the sutta. You remember one example that we have seen. In the sutta, we have to understand ittikyo. That means the long a when it means feminine. Because if we don't say when it means feminine, then the technical term will include also those words that end in long a, like satta, teacher. But then if we use the technical term ga, including feminines and masculines, then we will get into trouble, because the genitive of satta is not sattaya, it's sattuno. So we should not mix one thing with the other. That's why he's just testing that every word in the sutta is necessary to obtain the necessary or the expected results. This I think next day or the day that we are going to deal with paribhashas or some other day, I will try to bring some quotes where scholars discuss what is the exact role of vyakarana, of grammar. So here we've been discussing sometimes, like if you want to study Pali using traditional grammars, what to do, etc., etc. But the role of traditional grammars and the role of modern grammars or Pali readers is not exactly the same. So the role of vyakarana in the Indian tradition is not to teach you the language, it's to teach you how to analyze the language, which is slightly different and sometimes very different. So the Kaccāyana Pali grammar, as you all know, is written in Pali. So if you don't know Pali, you cannot read it. That's the first thing. So it is definitely not a grammar that teaches you Pali, because you need to know Pali before. So that you will learn in some way or the other. In India, of course, everyone would more or less understand the language. So this is a difference between the traditional grammar and our grammar. So that's why the Kaccāyana grammar, the traditional grammar, looks different than our modern grammars, and it is concerned with certain problems that maybe we don't pay attention to in our grammars, but we pay attention to those problems, as we were discussing now, when it comes to commentary and interpretation of word analysis and so on. So it's more about word analysis. So in this sense, the counterexamples are also just to check that we will get the results that we are already expecting, because we already know Pali. So we already know how a feminine genitive is going to look like. That's the idea. I don't know if that makes sense. And the other question, in one slide, you quoted the text in which the term yoga was used to designate the sutta in Kaccāyana. I'm aware that yoga is used in a similar way in Panini, but are these words yoga, sutta simply synonyms? If you have not already, can you comment on the use? The honest answer is I cannot tell. I don't know. I just know that in traditionally, yes, it's the same meaning. I think even in the Saddhaniti, Agavamsa says something like that there are many ways for the sutta. You can call it sutta or yoga, and there are many ways for the buddhi or for the commentary. So these are, basically, they are synonyms. But I don't know what is the exact origin of the word yoga for sutra, and if it has a nuance that I'm missing. Of course, there must be some relationship between yoga and prayoga, so the yoga and the prayoga. The yoga would be the rule, and the prayoga, the how to use the rule. That will be correlated to lakshana and lakshya. So the lakshana is the rule, what describes, what gives you the mark, and the lakshya is what is described, that is the language. So maybe there is this kind of relation. There's always this dichotomy between the grammar, which is describing something, and the object that is described. So there's always rules that describe a language. And then there is the yoga, that would be the sutta, the rule of the grammar, and the prayoga, that would mean the application of that, how this sutta is applied. So in this case, I think we have to understand yoga together with prayoga. But more than that, I cannot say. I think I would just say they are synonyms, especially in that stanza. Then another question by Divan Jones. Follow-up question to your general explanation of the purpose of Pali Vyakaranas. Are Kaccāyana and other texts to be understood as generative grammars so that readers can correctly speak and write Pali? Or were they used for more analytic purposes? That's a great question. I asked this question to myself many times. I don't have an answer, honestly. It is well known that after Chomsky and other modern linguists, people have seen in Panini and other Indian grammars models for generative grammar, but I'm not so sure that that concept applies directly to Indian grammar, because the Indian grammar, including the Kaccāyana grammar, is always considered an anga, like in the case of the Sanskrit grammar, it's a Vedanga. It's an anga, that is a limb, that is an ancillary work. It's an assistance to analyze certain texts, not any text, and absolutely not the language. In the case of Pali, there is no intention to teach you how language works or how you should construe a sentence in Pali. That's not the main purpose, although you can learn how to do it. The main purpose is to help you to understand how the words of the Buddha are built and derived, so that you will be able to analyze these words correctly. That is for the Kaccāyana grammar only. But of course, there are certain similarities, and that is not a coincidence. That's because some of the linguists, especially I think in America, they were aware of the Paninian system, and they had been studying traditional grammars, and they try to apply different approaches to grammar, and they come up with this the idea of generative grammar. But I'm not an expert in that, and I'm sorry, I cannot say more.
Thank you very much. That's really useful.
There is another question here by
Tony has his hand raised to ask a question.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Aleix, I was wondering, I mean, it's pretty clear that the Vuttis have historical layers to them, and that they may have been added, or that's what I'm taking from it. Is there any ways to do some relative dating to the layers of the Vutti? And I mean, are they still being added to today? Do you have any kind of like, this was probably added in the such and such century or something like that?
Yeah, that's again a very good question. One problem with when we are discussing about text, like if we discuss about the Kaccāyana text and the Vutti, is that, as I said in the first lecture, when it comes to Pali manuscripts, one of the most common, most abundant manuscript is the Kaccāyana. So although I never counted them or calculated, I guess there must be thousands of Kaccāyana manuscripts in the world. So the first question would be, who is going to study them? Probably not a human being, maybe with artificial intelligence. Some machine can do the work, and then you feed the machine all these manuscripts and ask questions to the machine. We can ask the same question. Can you see any layer? Can you see any development, any patterns? But for a human being to do that would be quite difficult, because the mass of materials that we have is too large. So to properly answer the question, I think, in my opinion, would require a study of the manuscript sources, which is something that has not been done. And basically, as I mentioned before, when Ole Pin was preparing his critical edition, in the preface and also in this article that I have cited, he explained why he could not use manuscripts, because if you start working on manuscripts, the first thing that you will have to do is to sift through, as you were pointing out, Tony, and then you will probably begin to discover certain patterns, certain families of manuscripts, definitely probably one family in Southeast Asia, another tradition in Sri Lanka. Then you might remember that Ole Pin is separating the tradition of the text of the Vutti from the tradition of the text of the Mukamattadipani, which is a commentary that comments on the Vutti. But what about the manuscripts of the Mukamattadipani? Has anyone studied these manuscripts? Are all the Mukamattadipanis, do they look exactly the same? That is a question that no one can answer. Again, the Mukamattadipani or Nyasa is a very common manuscript in libraries all over Southeast Asia, in Sri Lanka. So who is going to do this work? That's the question. I think, or there is a massive team of scholars who join efforts and many years of their life, and they put their health there, and they just do this for a living. Or maybe we can wait until the machines can do it. But I think that to go back to the question, to answer this question could only be possible if we study all the manuscripts. So I would say the manuscripts that we have studied so far of the Kaccāyana are not even 1% of the Kaccāyana manuscripts in the world. Not even, I mean, probably not even 0.1% of the Kaccāyana manuscripts. So, and that's what we know from the Kaccāyana. And as for whether this process of edition is still going on, not really. But I have one copy of the Kaccāyana with the Burmese translation, and there are written notes on the printed edition. So the printed edition is a photocopy from someone's notes. So these things still happen, and who knows if someone in the future will retype Sept everything and will include the notes that are in the margins into the text. This could happen, but apart from that, I don't know.
Thank you.
Welcome. Another question, Kate. From my experience studying Panini, I would say it was seen as a generative for forming language.
I was just responding to the previous discussion, Divan Jones's question about generative grammar. So in studying Panini in with Bhagavat Shastri and in Pune and other teachers in Varanasi, they're both themselves and referring historically, they saw the whole system as being to create. Yes. And so so that idea of it creating the entire language is there. And with Kaccāyana, it seems to me difficult because I don't think you can create all Pali with Kaccāyana. So, and yet, if we look at things like that story of the origins of Kaccāyana's grammar that you mentioned, attributing it to Mahakassapa, there it's treated as if it's generative, but obviously that story is, you know, I don't know when that story derives from, and but it postdates the actual grammar.
Okay, so I would like to thank everyone for the feedback. I will have a look again, and maybe for the next session, I will try to make some adjustment. May I repeat that there is the slides are already uploaded in the Google Drive, today's slides also, and you can see my email there. If you have any question or feedback, I would really appreciate, and I can also make adjustments in the next 3 sessions. Now we have covered half of the course. We have still half to go, and hopefully next day we are going to, if there is no objection, we are going to read the Kaccāyana. So we haven't done it till now. We have not really read the text and translated, but next day we will read a small portion, because I would like to show how the rules are interconnected, and there is a kind of flow of information that goes from one rule to the other, and then some information is cancelled and new information is added. So how this works, I think the best way to show that is to read together. So that's what we're going to do next day.
That sounds really great to me. That's really wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. See you next week.
See you.
See you next week.
See you next week.
Bye-bye. See you next week. Okay. I think today the numbers were a little bit more reasonable. Maybe last week many people got scared.
It's good. Gonna say goodbye to our last couple of guests. So Maya, thank you for attending. See you next time, I hope. And Jay or Jai, nice to see you, and see you next time, I hope. Okay. Just us. We had some very nice comments in the chat. Yeah, I think 28 people today. So those are the people who can handle.
Last week was a bottleneck, I think.
Although I do think sometimes people they forget or
Yeah. If you have it on YouTube, then you can watch again. I guess that's what I would do anyway. If they are going to upload it, maybe I will just.
I'm so bad at that. I don't think I'm very good at doing it, so I prefer to do